So, Module 6, we're going to go ahead and dive a little bit deeper into paraphilic disorders by talking about some of the very common specific types that are out there. And we're going to go ahead and start off with fetishistic disorder. So, first, let's just talk about what a fetish exactly is. This is going to be an object that is believed to have some sort of magical powers to protect and help its owner. That was what a fetish started out with. With fetishistic disorders, what you see now, it's defined in association with the sexual arousal around non-living objects. And so some very common kind of fetishistic items are things like women's underwear, shoes, boots, or products made out of rubber or leather. And so you can see that they usually make occurrence on some TV shows and stuff about people who have various fetishes. Transvestic disorder, this is going to be cross-dressing for the purpose of sexual arousal and is primarily done among heterosexual men. What it is important to note is to not confuse transvestic disorder with gay men who cross-dress, known as drag queens. There is a difference, and the gay men who dress as drag queens are not doing it for sexual arousal, where the heterosexual men, are. And as you can see there, the men with a transvestic disorder are unremarkable in regards to their masculine pursuit, in regards to their interests or the occupations or other types of behaviors that they have, aside from the fact that they dress like women for their own sexual arousal. Another one that usually garners a lot of attention is sexual masochism disorder. Seems like a lot of premium TV shows have delved into this particular type of paraphilia. And what you see with somebody who has a masochist is these kind of recurrent, intense sexual arousing fantasies or urges or impulses. And these involve being humiliated by being beaten or bound or otherwise somehow made to suffer. Now, the masochists, they are sexually aroused when they're subjected to pain or embarrassment, but they go to really great lengths to avoid injury during these kind of contrived and ritualized experiences. So they aren't really putting themselves at risk necessarily, or they're only doing it in a certain manner. And otherwise, they want to avoid actual injury. A lot of people who are engaged in masochistic sexual practices are highly educated, and a lot of times they're occupationally successful. They're disproportionately represented among the privileged groups in society. And we could, I'm sure, go into a lot of the psychological aspects of why that might be, but we don't really have the time to do that here. One of the most common masochistic fantasies is being forced to display their body, their naked body, to other people. Now, on the flip side, you have sexual sadists or sexual sadism disorder. In this case, you see their intense sexually arousing fantasies and urges or behaviors that involve psychological or physical suffering of a victim. So you can see where a sadist might hook up with a masochist and that they might both be happy, depending. Of course, one could go too far. But that's where you hear the term sadomasochism, because the two often do go frequently together as kind of complementary disorders. Sadistic fantasies a lot of times involve asserting dominance over a victim, and that experience of power and control can oftentimes be as important as inflicting pain on the individual. Okay. So that's sexual sadism and sexual masochism. Next is exhibitionistic disorder. What we see here and the criteria is that, once again, over a period of 6 months at least, there is a reoccurrent and intense sexual arousal from exposure of one's genitals to unsuspecting people as manifested by fantasies, urges, or behaviors. The stereotype of somebody with an exhibitionistic disorder is the one in the trench coat with nothing underneath and then flashing people. Indecent exposure is usually that the individual has acted on the sexual urges that they have with a non-consenting person, or the sexual urges or fantasies are causing that clinically kind of significant distress or impairment in their social, occupational, or other important areas. So once again, just like any other disorder, that kind of disruption of typical functioning is one of the key characteristics. Now, this particular disorder is almost exclusively a male disorder, and most exhibitionists are going to expose themselves when they're teenagers or in their early 20s is when it starts. Obviously, it can continue on for a number of years. Moving on to voyeuristic disorder, this is when you're observing an unsuspecting person, usually a stranger who's either naked or in the process of disrobing or engaging in sexual activity and watching that activity. There was a notorious case of an individual who basically stalked a female sportscaster and was engaging in voyeuristic behaviors by getting hotel rooms to where she was having her hotel. And so it's around there. They feel that the just watching or peeping, as they might call it, hence the peeping Tom, is arousing in its own right. And the secret nature of the observation and the risk of discovery may contribute to a lot of the arousing aspects above and beyond of the actual behaviors that they're witnessing. Now, most voyeurs are going to keep their distance from the victim and are not generally considered dangerous. Of course, the moment you say any statement like that, you get somebody that is kind of outside the typical and maybe does something that's more of a risk factor. Now, obviously, if you're the one being observed, you feel a lot of violation going on. So it is a significant and illegal activity for individuals. Freuderistic disorder, what you see in freuderistic disorder is that the person's fully clothed, but they become sexually aroused by touching or rubbing their genitals against other non-consenting people. So you can imagine the reason that they have a bus up there, the highly crowded public transport where people are kind of packed in. You can see that it would be very easy for a freuderistic disorder to go ahead and engage in that behavior. It is a very high frequency kind of behavior. And as soon as the individual has done the act, they try to escape as quickly as possible. So their goal is not really having further sexual contact. All the gratification that they are looking for, they have gotten out of that fully clothed kind of non-consensual contact. So that's freuderistic disorder. Moving on to pedophilia or pedophilic disorder, what you see here is very recurrent, intense, sexually arousing fantasies or sexual urges, or even behaviors that involve sexual activity with prepubescent children. That usually means children under the age of 13. All you got to do is look in our local paper or online, and you find that there are a lot of people that have pedophilia. It is one of the scourges of disorders because it damages not only the individual who is the paraphilic, but pedophile, but obviously the children that are impacted. And then, of course, you have with the internet trade in videos of people that further enhances these tendencies of this disorder. Victims are more often girls than boys, but there are plenty of boys who also get molested. And most of the cases, the child is going to know the person who molests them. And almost half of all the offenses are occurring in either the home of the child or the offender. So there, obviously, this is an illegal behavior type of disorder that's out there, and one that certainly has a huge stigma attached to it. So you know that it's a disorder. Otherwise, why would people engage when there's such a societal stigma against these type of things? So just to kind of give you a paraphilic disorder listed in the DSM-5, you have the sexual arousal associated with pain, which we saw with the voyeuristic. I think I've switched those around a little bit in my preparation for the slide. Obviously, sexual arousal associated with pain, you're not going to have those. You're going to have the sexual sadism, sexual masochism, and pedophilia. If you have this sexual arousal, the anomalous target preferences, that's going to be the more voyeuristic, exhibitionist, and frotteristic disorders, and then those that are directed elsewhere. Boy, I got to look at this slide again. So pardon me, don't pay attention to this slide, pay attention to the other modules and what we were talking about earlier in this particular module. And then module 7 here, we're going to talk about the origins or the causes of paraphilia and some efforts to go ahead and treat it.